The spade came down before he even knew what was underneath it. Cliff Bradshaw heard the beep in his headphones the way he'd heard thousands of beeps before, over 20 years of sweeping the same stretch of farmland in Kent. Bottle caps, horseshoes, the occasional coin worth less than the batteries in his detector. He'd walked this exact ground so many times he could probably draw it from memory. So when the signal came in strong that November afternoon in 2001, he did what he always did. He pushed the spade into the soil, levered up a clod of earth, and felt it connect with something solid. He didn't know it yet, but that single downward push had just crushed a piece of gold that had survived undisturbed for roughly 3,500 years. When he turned the earth over and saw the glint, his first thought wasn't triumph, it was confusion. The object in the dirt was flattened, warped, folded in on itself like a crumpled tin can. Whatever it had once been, it clearly wasn't supposed to look like this. He'd found something, and in the same motion, without ever meaning to, he had very nearly destroyed it. What Bradshaw was holding, though he had no way of knowing it in that field, was one of the finest examples of prehistoric goldwork ever recovered in Britain. A cup, hand-beaten from a single sheet of gold, so thin in places it was barely thicker than a fingernail, ribbed with delicate horizontal corrugations that ran in perfect parallel lines around its body. Made somewhere between 1700 and 1500 BCE, made before Stonehenge's final stones were even fully raised into their settings, before the pyramids at Giza had finished weathering their first 1,000 years. Only a handful of vessels like it have ever been found anywhere in Britain. The closest known relative had been sitting in a museum case for over a century and a half, ever since a group of workmen broke into a Cornish burial mound in 1837 and pulled a strikingly similar gold cup out of a stone coffin alongside a skeleton, a dagger, and a bronze knife. That one is called the Ringlemere Cup, and for generations it stood almost entirely alone, a lonely, singular oddity of the Bronze Age. Archaeologists connected it loosely to a small number of gold and amber cups found across the sea in Germany and France, cups that shared its ribbed construction and delicate proportions, thought to belong to an elite class of chieftains and warrior leaders who used gold drinking vessels as symbols of status and possibly as ritual objects at feasts or funerals. But Britain had only ever produced the one clear example. Bradshaw's crushed lump of gold was about to become the second. He did not try to hide the damage, and he did not try to keep the find for himself. He reported it, as the law required, to the local coroner's office under the Treasure Act of 1996, the legislation that governs exactly this kind of discovery in England and Wales. Any object over 300 years old made substantially of gold or silver is legally defined as treasure the moment it comes out of the ground, and it must be reported within 14 days, whether the finder likes what happens next or not. Archaeologists who later examined the site did not stop at the cup. They kept digging, and what they found underneath and around the spot reframed the whole story. Ringlemere Farm wasn't just an empty field that happened to have a gold cup buried in it. It was the remains of a ceremonial barrow, a burial mound built and used across centuries, the kind of site reserved for people of significant status in Bronze Age society. The cup hadn't been dropped or lost. It had been placed there deliberately, as part of a burial or a ritual act, alongside a figure whose identity has been lost to over 3,000 years of English weather and English plows. Which makes the moment of the spade strike land differently once you understand it. Bradshaw wasn't unlucky to hit something solid in ordinary dirt. He had, without any way of predicting it, driven metal down onto an object that generations of careful hands had once treated as sacred enough to bury with the dead. The Treasure Valuation Committee, the independent body that assesses finds like this for fair market value, examined the crushed and cleaned object and set its value at approximately £270,000. The British Museum paid that sum to acquire the cup permanently for the national collection. Under the Treasure Act, that reward is split between the finder and the owner of the land it was found on, an arrangement designed so that landowners have every incentive to allow detecting on their property instead of quietly discouraging it. Bradshaw and the farm's owner divided the payment between them, a life-changing sum built entirely on a discovery he'd made by accident and nearly ruined by instinct. The real work started after the money was settled. Conservators at the British Museum took the flattened, folded lump of gold and began the slow process of coaxing it back toward its original shape, working the soft metal outward in careful, incremental stages rather than forcing it, because gold this thin can tear as easily as it can bend. They didn't erase what had happened to it. They couldn't, not fully, and in the end they chose not to try. The cup you can see today stands close to its intended proportions, its corrugated ribbing restored to something like its original rhythm, but faint traces of the crushing are still visible if you know to look for them. Quiet evidence baked permanently into the surface of a 3,500-year-old object. There is something almost unbearable about the timing of it. A spade blow that took less than a second undid, however briefly, work that had taken a Bronze Age goldsmith days of patient hammering, and came within a hair of erasing something that had survived every flood, every plow, every century of English rain, since before the pyramids finished settling into the desert. Every detectorist who has ever heard this story tells it a little differently, but they all land on the same fear. Not the fear of finding nothing, the fear of finding everything, and being the one whose hand comes down half a second too soon.